All right, welcome back. We are here with Martin Hahn, who is currently perhaps a short timing on being the executive director for the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness. And we wanted you to come in just in your role as coalition of advocates across the state who have been working to end homelessness. I don't know that VCEH, except through one of your predecessors, has testified on the notion of having this Bill of Rights and having this kind of discrimination protection for those where housing status cannot be used as a means of discrimination. So not having been here before, we're going to go around the circle and introduce ourselves. Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Claudia Lamar, Washington District.
Joe Parsons, Newberry, Thompson, and Groton.
Caleb Elder, East Darksboro.
Dennis Labowne, Caledonia 3.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows, and I represent Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
And I'm Larry Labor. I represent Essex, Orleans, District 1.
I'm Mary Howard, and I represent Rutland City, District 6.
I'm Robin Chestnut Tangerman, represent Rutland Bennington District.
Welcome.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Martin Hahn. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness. And I believe Erhard Manka takes credit for the first introduction of homeless bill of rights over a decade ago. So not fact checked yet. The Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness encourages the passage of H-132, an act related to establishing a homelessness bill of rights and prohibiting discrimination against persons without homes. Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness seeks to ensure that people in Vermont have safe, stable, and affordable homes. And if homelessness does occur, it is brief, rare, and non-recurring, and that those experiencing homelessness are treated with dignity and respect. Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness is a 501c nonprofit organization. We work with 11 regional housing coalitions around the state, from Brattleboro to Bennington to Franklin County to the Northeast Kingdom, who are members of our coalition. At a point in time last year, the number of people experiencing homelessness in Vermont was 2,780, an increase of almost 200 people compared to 2021. During the same period, the number of people experiencing homelessness or in households with children increased 36%. As of this January, middle of the month, there were 2,200 adults and 620 children living in hotels, temporary shelter.
You say that again? Sorry.
Yeah. 2,200 adults and 621 children in hotels.
The 2,800 and change.
Yes, 2,800 people. 1,800 households. People experiencing homelessness deserve to live with dignity and respect and to engage in life's daily activities without experiencing discrimination. This fundamental right applies to obtaining and maintaining employment, accessing health care in schools, seeking to rent a hotel room, or obtaining permanent housing. We know that these activities support households to maintain community connections, their physical and mental health, and to support financial well-being, leading to positive long-term outcomes. Additionally, those who are experiencing homelessness must be able to use and enjoy public spaces and have the same right to privacy that those of us who are housed enjoy. Some shelters are open only at night. People without homes need a place to go during the day. These individuals can experience harassment and discrimination when they're simply trying to exist in public spaces, stay warm, and be safe. This point seems particularly important when you consider that the average length of time that someone experiences homelessness in Vermont is approximately 238 days. Allowing people without homes to continue to experience discrimination is perpetuating stigma and pushing vulnerable populations further into the margins. We believe that this bill supports the coalition's mission to ensure that those experiencing homelessness are treated with dignity and respect. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions or if there's any data that you need. And Chair Stevens, I wonder if I could have 1 minute for a different but related topic.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. At the beginning of the session, a statewide coalition of affordable housing developers, homeless advocates, service providers, shelter providers met to plan for the end of the hotel program, which we knew. We've been seeing this cliff coming for quite some period of time. The date of the cliff keeps getting extended, but it appears now that we're locked in. And our task was to figure out what are we going to do? How are we going to respond to the end of the federal funding to keep people in hotels? And we put together a called Bridges to Housing proposal that outlined a bunch of different steps around services, permanent housing, and temporary housing. This was endorsed by 20 organizations, including Rural Edge, the Upper Valley Haven, CVOEO, Champlain Housing Trust, Good Samaritan Haven, and Lamoille Community House. One very modest proposal has slipped through the cracks, and that is to award CVOEO, Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, $50,000 to redo the roadmap to end homelessness, which was commissioned for the legislature in 2017. We need a roadmap. The end of the hotel program has shown how fragile our delivery system is and how fragile the folks are who are experiencing homelessness. In the next 3 months, we face 1,800 households losing their temporary shelter in hotels. We need a roadmap to end homelessness that reflects the value of elected leadership, shelter and service providers, and the needs of those who are unhoused. So my reason for being here today is to endorse H132, but also encourage you to think about an opportunity as a way for us to modestly support a renewal of the roadmap to end homelessness. Thank you.
Representative O'Donnell.
Do you have any numbers on how many of those individuals come at the end of the hotel voucher, if you will?
Yes.
How many are going to be kicked out, if you will?
So there are a couple deadlines. One deadline is the end of May. We are currently in adverse weather conditions for general assistance emergency housing. Means that anybody who's experiencing homelessness, if there is room, can stay in a hotel. That ends on May 31st. As of June 1st, those who meet certain conditions, i.e. they get SSI, SSDI, elderly, have children, I can't remember all the exceptions, are extended to the end of June through the state fiscal year. On July 1, we don't know. We're waiting for action. We're waiting action from you and from the appropriators, whether there will be resources to keep extending that. We have asked, and it's in our Bridges to Housing proposal, that an additional $72 million be appropriated to extend the hotel program. We realize the hotel program is a far from perfect solution. However, it's shelter. And so we would seek to extend it while VHCB and its partners develop a permanent housing to get people into decent housing. So as of the end of May, I just looked at this number. I believe it's about 800 people will have to move out of hotels. And that the balance of it's then 1,200 people will need to, at the end of June, will need to move out of hotels.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Hilda.
Thanks for coming and speaking with us today. Just reviewing the Bridges to Housing plan, I just want to confirm, I'm going through it now. The total money over the course of the plan is a little over $300 million. It's like $320 million. Is that right? Am I counting up right?
I don't know the answer to that. I take her right.
So things haven't radically changed since the February report in terms of the recommendation.
Yes.
So it would be several $100 million over a 3-year period.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and 175 million of that is for VHCB for their sort of one-time funding for them to continue to invest in permanent housing, whether it be apartments, mobile homes, home ownership, preservation of existing. So a significant portion of that is an investment in housing conservation board.
And then also that 175 plus another 40 million to VHCB for a different capital investment.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to speak on behalf of my experience doing this work is we continue to need non-congregate shelter, emergency shelter, that there is going to inevitably be people who are in transition and will need shelter long into the future. And so we need to not just invest in permanent housing, but in non-congregate shelter opportunities as well.
I don't know if you have information on this, but, one of the things we've been hearing is that we have, over the course of the pandemic, rehoused or found permanent housing for 2,000 people,
Yes,
but we've had 2,000
yes,
newly homeless people
Yes.
arrive.
yes.
Because we're the housing community, we hear about a lot of things like no cause eviction, or, people wanting to sell or upgrade their properties and charge a higher rent, things like that. But do you have any figures for the causes of homelessness, those breakdowns?
Yes and no. So the Vermont Coalition on Homelessness, along with our allies in Chittenden County, the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance, do an annual point in time count and literally try to count everybody in the state who was homeless at that period of time. That was January 25th of this year. We should have a report shortly. And in that point in time count, people self-declare whether they are disabled, whether they're experiencing mental health concerns, whether they have a substance use disorder. And so I have that information, how people self-identify. The advantage of there are a lot of weaknesses to the point in time count, but an advantage is it allows you to compare over time what's happening. And we were seeing a slow decline in the population prior to the pandemic. And then a radical jump in 2020, continued in 2021 and 2022. The reason for that is anecdotal, and I'm going to give what I understand to be the reason is to be homeless, there is a definition, a federal definition of what is homelessness. Somebody who is sleeping on their mother's couch and unwanted is not homeless. And so when the pandemic set in and people were able to then be rehoused in hotel rooms, folks moved off their mother's couch. They moved out of their friend's garage. If they were in an unsafe environment, they moved out of that unsafe environment. If they couldn't be close to somebody because of their immunity issues, they moved out and were able. So I believe that the increase is more representative of actual homelessness than it was previously. I also expect when the hotel program ends, some of those people will go back to their mother. You know what, I'm using the wrong maybe analogy. They'll go back to that unsafe situation, the overcrowded situation. So it's not that everybody's going to be outdoors and unhoused. I think some people will be reabsorbed into the housing market. We don't know. It will be interesting to find that out, but we don't know what that number will be. Am I answering your question?
Yes. And I had always speculated that some portion of people that we would consider homeless are couch surfing.
Yes.
But just wondering if you had any concrete numbers, but it sounds like your anecdotal information.
It's anecdotal. It's anecdotal. Yep.
I agree with my anecdote.
I am aware of testimony about how many of those in hotels have moved from out of state. And I'm not going to re-quote it. It's a very small number. And I'll send an email follow up with a committee with what that number is and the self-reporting on what people are experiencing when they're homeless related to what conditions they might have. So I'll follow up with an email.
One other question, which is wondering if we're looking for for proper terminology for the title of this bill.
Yes.
And wondering if you have suggestions. We tend to shy away from homeless as a definitive, descriptive, as a category rather than a descriptor.
Yes.
And
we don't refer to a person as being homeless. We talk about a person who is either unhoused or is experiencing homelessness. They're not identified by virtue of their temporary experience. So that's the only advice I have, is to not refer to the homeless or to the unhoused, but to people who are experiencing it, because it is a temporary, almost universally a temporary condition. I listened to the Vermont League of Cities and Towns testimony last Friday, I believe, And they were suggesting that the protected class just be amended directly in those particular statutes as opposed to being a separate bill. That's the Bill of Rights. I'm not an attorney and I don't want to, which seemed like seemed like a reasonable alternative. That in fact, it's the definition of the protected class is revised as opposed to it needing to be in a standalone. But again, I'm not expressing any legal opinion about that, but it seems like a possible alternative.
Representative Burrows and Helen.
Thank you. So I wondered whether for the last 2 years, not 2023, but well, 2020, 2021 and 2022, just off the top of your head, how stable was after the sort of crash of people because of the pandemic, how stable was the population of people in hotels during those years?
Yeah, and I'm speaking based on sort of general knowledge and anecdote, and I would say it was quite stable. It was very disconcerting. I'll just state the obvious. There were a number of deadlines that happened over the 3-year period of the COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, funding's going to run out in September. Oh, this household will no longer qualify, and then that gets pulled back. And so the temperature out in the hotels now is very high because we appear to be at a notch. We've really reached the deadline. That is May 31st and June 30th. So, but it's a stable population.
My next question was, so you continually interviewed or took data from that somewhat stable population, is that right?
Yes, so the state of Vermont has what's called a coordinated entry system. So if somebody is staying in the hotels, we have information on that person and their housing situation and their family and their circumstances and what their service needs are. And that database, which is it's a shared statewide database, is maintained on an ongoing basis. So yes, we know.
So only at the point of entry? I mean, what I'm getting at is it only at the point of
No,
entry or is it ongoing?
It's ongoing.
Okay.
Yes.
So my real question
Yes.
is, and you don't have to answer this right now, but what I want to know is whether in that somewhat stable population, there was an increase in self-reporting mental illness or drug use, whether that increased in that group.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. The self-reporting is done once a year at the point of time count, and it doesn't track individual by individual what changed for this person's circumstance. I know that the reporting so I'm going to get back to you. There was
You don't have to answer that right
there
now.
was actually a decrease in some of the reported conditions from 2021 to 2022. And we don't know the reason for that. It seemed whether it was a statistical blip or a reflection of actually getting more care, which is what we hope.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Howard.
Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. I'm sure you can't answer this, but what is going to happen on that cutoff day, July? Where are these people going to go? Because housing is such a problem everywhere. I'm really concerned for the number of children that are going to be, just thrown out onto the street. I mean, there have been talks about getting them tents and et cetera, but do you have any idea what the procedure is? How do you take like the first 5 people and try and find them a place?
I actually don't have an answer to that. I'm sad to say I'm not here in this role, but I am also chair of the board of Good Samaritan Haven. And we just sent out a funding appeal for tents and sleeping bags to be able to respond to exactly that circumstance. I know that police departments are talking about this. How are you going to respond to encampments? Should there be an increase? So it appears that it's each local community's job to develop a response. So there may be one community which is ready to gather people in and support them, and there are others that want, and there's great uncertainty. So I wish I could.
I know, it just breaks my heart to think of what's going to happen and is it going to happen safely?
Yes. Yeah, there are a lot of really dedicated people in our communities who are doing this work, who are community action agencies, the shelters, this folks with the Agency of Human Services, or everybody's looking out how to care for folks. So our mind is on it, our work is on it, but I don't know what we're going to do, to tell you the truth.
Further for Martin right now. Thank you, and thank you for your service to the organization, and you know that there's changes afoot with BHC and DCEH. But thank you so much for your service, not just in this case, but in all your roles and how.
Yeah, and I will offer, there is a piece of that, like something that interested to know. Rod knows how to find me, and I'm happy to provide information to any individual.
Great. Thank you, Martin. All right, I gotta go to a meeting. Everybody who is scheduled to be in the next hearing is here, so if you wanted to start a minute early. Let's do that.
Okay, so we are going to segue into the next section, which is regarding H21. Act relating to landlord notice of utility actions. We have 3 witnesses scheduled, the first being Carol Flint, Consumer Affairs Director, Department of Public Service. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Carol Flint, and I work at the Department of Public Service as the Director of the Consumer Affairs, Public Information, and Administrative Services Division. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about H21, utility disconnection and landlord notification. Consumer Affairs and Public Information staff. This is a division at the department that receives contacts from Vermont consumers, sometimes referred by folks on this very committee or others. So they're your constituents, and these folks are making inquiries, often complaining or making comments about utility cases in front of the PUC, rate increases, et cetera. This division investigates complaints made by consumers against utilities, and they also provide informal complaint resolution assistance, among other responsibilities. So anecdotally, staff tell me that landlords that we hear from are often frustrated by the privacy policies that are set in place by Vermont utilities. Landlords are rightfully concerned about protecting their properties from no heat issues that could be caused by loss of electricity. Consumer Affairs and Public Information staff also hear from about 100 Vermont constituents each year that are requesting assistance with payment arrangements. Many of these Vermont constituents are facing disconnection of service. Others are addressing concerns with paying for a security deposit. Anecdotally, these tenants are rightfully concerned about protecting their personal and financial information. The tenants are rightfully concerned about maintaining their housing. Tenants relay concerns that they may be evicted if a landlord were to hear about the tenant's failure to pay the utility bill. Tenants' concerns are valid. Leases that include tenants' responsibilities to pay certain utilities also often include these responsibilities, if unmet, to be reasons or conditions for eviction. The Consumer Affairs and Public Information Division staff are very concerned that no personal nor financial information be provided to landlords by utilities. A customers' privacy should be respected. There are at least 3 Public Utility Commission cases addressing utility customer privacy concerns. I provided copies of relevant documents from these 3 cases, and they should be available to you in your folders. I don't know what you can see, but they're on the web. Your clerk uploaded them. And so the first is a statement of principles relative to privacy from docket 7307, which is a docket that was looking into cybersecurity, among other things. I also included the final order from what we refer to as the Barton case, which was docket number 6075, an investigation into the confidentiality of customer bills of Barton Village Incorporated Electric Department. And then the third document that I thought might be useful for you to have is from docket 4989, the tariff filing of the Village of Stowe Electric Department, which was requesting a revision to its rules and regulations. And there's a lengthy discussion about privacy, customer privacy, and the various rules and regulations that impact that. This last case, there's a specific discussion also about Stowe's proposal that all charges for electric service be billed to the property owner. The CAPI division, Consumer Affairs and Public Information Division, is also concerned about the increased costs. And these increased costs would be borne by all ratepayers in order for utilities to implement additional tracking mechanisms and staffing with its associated costs to alert landlords. CAPI is concerned that this bill does not include any requirements of the utilities to notify tenants in advance that landlords might be provided information about their personal or financial information. And so that brings me to the end of what I had prepared to talk about. And so I just, again, want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this committee. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? I have one for you, and I have not read the documents that you provided to us. So I don't know the privacy policy, but can tenants or could a landlord require that a tenant sign a waiver of giving up that privacy right, so the landlord be informed in the case of disconnection, pending disconnection?
So I would assume that that's possible. I mean, I'm sure you hear people saying they're not lawyers, so I'll say I'm not a lawyer, but I would assume.
I asked you because I'm not a lawyer.
I would assume that landlords could ask tenants to sign a variety of things. I don't know if, some of the federal laws don't look at that type of thing. And there is always a quid pro quo, in terms of obtaining housing, you give up certain things. The right to privacy is often referred to as an inalienable or constitutional right. There's a good discussion about that in the Stowe case that I provided the document for. I don't believe that it is actually constitutional, but people say that. And it depends what is being provided. Account number information or PII, personally identifiable information that someone could use to steal another's identity theft is what, for example, the docket 7307, the cybersecurity docket is most concerned with. Simply letting someone know the utilities have been shut off at such and such a property, it doesn't feel to me as though it goes quite that far. But again, those details are not in the bill, so it's very hard for me to say. I tried to give you a variety of things to think about and look at that were both concerns and specifically helpful. So.
Representative Howard.
Thank you. Don't most utilities offer a payment plan for their customers?
They do, and payment arrangements are required by the Public Utility Commission disconnection rule 3.3. And that payment arrangement is something that we often, the Consumer Affairs Division will help customers with their utilities get to, some sort of informal resolution, because sometimes the utility might want more than the customer has to pay. So we help them with that. So yes.
And also, is there not a procedure whereby the electricity is not shut off during really cold spells?
So that depends on the age of the household and also the temperatures in the utility service area. And that is covered also in Rule 3.3 by the Public Utility Commission. Frankly, this past winter, other than a couple of weeks, was warm enough that disconnections could and did occur around state most weeks this winter. So it really depends on the particular temperatures for the particular day, but generally over 10 degrees, a disconnection can occur unless there's an elder in the household, and then it would have to be above freezing. So it can still be quite cold and the service shut off.
Thank you.
Elder on the committee.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carol, for your testimony. I'm just looking at the Barton decision from 2009. This decision suggests to me that it would, basically this decision says that the utility can do what H21 is asking, right? Like they cannot disclose customer specific information, but they do recommend that they can inform landlords when electrical service is disconnected at the property, which is the goal of this bill. Am I interpreting that right?
Again, yes, I think you are. There are a couple of utilities that are going to speak and can speak to their own practices around that. So they could do that. There is a cost to do that, and that is a cost that is going to drive up costs for all ratepayers.
Do you know if Barton Electric adopted that practice after this order was issued?
I don't know.
Did they change their tariff in that way? No, okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to look at their current tariff.
Okay.
Are there further questions for Representative Labor?
Is there a mechanism, this is Larry Labor, is there a mechanism by which the utility company does not have to inform the landlord by name of the discontinuation, but by meter number? The landlord will know the address, will know the tenant, and at the same time, the tenant could be notified that there's an impending discontinuation.
I would defer that question, please, to the utility representatives that are going to speak to you. They don't all have the same accounting system, software, and staffing in place based on size. So there's a big difference between a small utility like Barton Electric versus, Green Mountain Power in terms of what they can do, what they have the ability to do easily, and whether or not they can, send a text from their software, for example.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Further questions for Carol? If not, thank you very much for your time and your testimony. And if we have further questions, we'll be in touch with you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Andrea, would you like to join us? And I probably should have done this with Carol, but it's your first time here, so we'll go around the table quickly and introduce ourselves. Representative Robin Chestnut Tinderman, Rutland Bennington District.
Representative Kathleen James from Bennington 4 District.
Claudia Lamont, Morristown, Elmore, Worcester, Woodbury, and Northern Parkstowe.
Joe Parsons, Thompson, Groton, and Newbury.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington.
Caleb Elder, Addison 4 District. I happen to be a VEC member and represent every VEC member in Addison County, which is about 200 households.
Dennis Labonte, Caledonia 3.
Hey, I am Elizabeth Burrows and I represent Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Larry Labor represents Essex, Orleans District 1.
Mary Howard, I represent Rutland District 6.
Thank you.
And
For the record, I'm Andrea Cohen. I'm with Vermont Electric Cooperative. I run the Member Relations Department, which includes our member service team. And I do have some slides. I thought since I haven't been here yet, I could just tell you a little bit about the co-op. Let me see if I can start from the beginning here. Thank you. Start from the beginning. So Vermont Electric Cooperative is a nonprofit member-owned utility. We're the second largest utility in the state after Green Mountain Power. And I like to show our folks our service territory because not everybody understands, where we are. We're the green town. So you see, we have the Lake Champlain Islands over the northern part of Lamoille and Franklin County, all the way over to Essex, Orleans. We have 35,000 members. We call our customers members. 75 towns, 8 counties. That little bit of Addison County is one of our counties. And we have 41,000 meters and almost 3,000 miles of line to maintain. We're pretty rural, 14 meters per mile. Gives you a sense of how many people are on a mile, which has some, my colleague from Washington Electric and Vermont Electric. We're pretty rural, meaning sometimes more expensive to maintain our system. So we're about 50% residential, 50% business, non-residential by load, by use of power. And our demographic is an older demographic. Almost half of our members are retired on fixed income. So you will hear us talk a lot about cost. Not that we're not interested in doing interesting and important things, but it's not going to work if it's not cost effective, especially with folks that are on fixed income. So when we talk about things like cost shifts and costs and who's paying, that's what motivates us. Again, interestingly.
Sorry, can we, on the previous slide, you said 35,000 members, 41,000 meters.
Correct.
How does that work?
Sometimes you have more than one meter because you have the farm, you have the barn and the main house, or you have solar and you have the main house. Or, so meters, there's more meters than members a lot of the time.
Okay. Thank you.
Interestingly, being relatively lower income and older, but 88% of our members actually own their homes. So when we get into this issue around landlords and things like that, that is kind of relevant to some of our conversation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this slide, but it's really, we refer to it a lot. Efficiency Vermont did what's called an energy burden report in 2019, and they're about to update it again. And what this means is related to your income, how much you spend on energy. It's electric, heating, transportation, all that. In this slide, they kind of break it out by different things if you want to dive into it. But we refer to this a lot because if you can see the darker red towns and the red towns, this is where the energy burden is the highest. So relative to income, people spend more on energy costs. That's really important when we talk about policies around, what impacts who and who's paying for what.
We have a lot of towns with a high energy burden, so again, we're looking out for the cost of service all the time. Does that make sense? I look forward to their new, so relevant to H21, we're really protective about the privacy of our members. And we're also really understand this challenge that landlords have about, if there's no power at their building and their pipes freeze and they have we get that, and we actually think there is a way to thread the needle on this to be supportive of our members and their privacy and also respect the landlord's needs. So we think there is a way that we can get to notifying them that the power is out to avoid the property damage. It does require more work on our part. The landlord is not our member. We might not even know who they are. Our customer / member is the one that pays the electric bill. So if the tenant is paying the electric bill, we might not even know who the landlord is. So kind of, this would be kind of a manual process no matter what. And so keeping an eye to how to do this efficiently, again, not to spend a lot of money on systems that aren't adding value, is really important. Of course, we can only do it if we have information about who the landlord is. So that's a first step, and that shouldn't be a burden on us, frankly, if you own a property and you want to let us know. We have this for voluntary disconnections right now. We will notify like if somebody says, I'm moving next week, shut my power off, I'm leaving, we can notify a landlord if we know who it is to say, did you know next week the power is going to be out? If you want to establish service, and we have some landlords that we work with very closely that's kind of our routine because there's a lot of turnover of rentals. I just had a quick question. I know you mentioned in the previous slide. So what's the percentage of renters that you think you have or? Well, 88% of our members own their home.
Okay.
So if that 12% is renters, but how many of them actually have the service in their name versus the landlord pays?
True.
I don't know that.
Okay. Thank you, sorry.
Yeah. As we thought about how do we, maybe thread the needle on this, one thing that's important is we're comfortable maybe notifying after the power is actually disconnected, which is not necessarily what the landlord would want. They probably want to know proactively. The problem is, and I'll share this, very few of our members who get disconnection notices actually ever get disconnected. And you started talking about that with DPS just now. The notice requirements are very extensive. We don't just say, oh, you stop paying your bill, power's out. It is months, maybe many, many months before someone might actually lose service. Because usually what happens is they get the notice that says, hey, you're late. And about 15% of our members get a notice every month. That's a lot of paper and mailing going out, but that's, they get the notice. And that's about 5,000 a month. We're actually sending out disconnect notices. And that would not be a point to contact the landlord. One, it's too many, and frankly, too many of those resolve themselves. The power's never shut off. Most of the folks who get that notice will just pay, be like, oops, I'm behind or whatever, and now I'm ready to pay. Or we work out those payment arrangements, which Carol was talking about. So we work out arrangements and folks catch up. And at any one time, we're managing about 1,000 payment arrangements with members. So that's a very common thing that we do. And most of those, 83%, end successfully. The arrangement's not broken and we work through that. So in all of those cases, we would not be interested in notifying landlords about that because most of that gets resolved and we wouldn't want to share personal information and we wouldn't want to take the time, frankly. So really at the end of the month, it's under 100 members that actually even get disconnected. And a lot of times they'll get reconnected right away. They get home and they're like, whoops, I let that go too far. They call us and they pay and the power is put back on. So, it's not that many at the end of the day that actually are really disconnected more than a day. And those would be the ones that if I was a landlord, I'd want to know about so I can maybe put service in my name. So as with many things, the devil's in the details here. If you did work on this bill and pass this bill, I would think through the PUC, we'd really want to make sure we're not spending a lot of time and effort on something that's not adding value and getting in the way of some relationships. Just while we're on the PUC rules, and Carol, if she's still on, has heard me talk about this for 7 years, and I said, since we're here, I thought I would take 2 minutes to put another pitch and just make you aware of something that we're doing that we really think needs to change in the current rules. And this has to do with the requirements that we actually go on site to leave that final notice before we disconnect. The current rules require us to do this. It's not safe. It's just not safe. You read in the news every day, people are showing up at people's doors for unprovoked, and trouble happens these days. Our folks are going out to disconnect power, not because we want to, not that, but after so much time, that's just the process. And we really feel like we're putting our staff in harm's way. We don't think it's necessary and it's dangerous. People are really upset and agitated at that point in the process, of course. And we feel like, and it also costs the member money for us to go out there, of course. So it's an added cost. It's really unsafe. These rules have been in place since like 1980. It is really time to update to current technology. We can make a phone call. We don't need to leave a door knocker, not when it's unsafe for our staff. So we feel very passionate about that, and just any chance we get to talk about that, we bring it up because it's a real safety issue. So we think there's alternatives and ways to do this, and if the rules are going to be updated for this landlord notification, it's time. So just end with that.
Representative James,
Just
and then
a-
Chestnut Ingram.
Just a curious question. How accurate is your phone number database with everybody switching to cells? And I'm just wondering,
Like that.
are the numbers you have on file pretty accurate, or do they get outdated
Good
quickly?
question. We're always updating every time we talk to a member. It's become our practice, like if we're doing a payment arrangement with someone, anytime we have someone on the phone, we check the numbers and make sure. But as people move and change and things happen, and not everybody has a permanent number, I appreciate that it's not, but we send notices, we do, if they're getting a bill, we can usually get in touch with them somehow.
My question is related to that, which is if you call, chances are you won't get anybody, but you might leave a message. With site visit require contact or just a site?
No, it doesn't require contact, it's just leaving the door number. And what happens, is we usually don't have contact. But the one time when we have bad contact, we've had to send the sheriff out with folks and we have notes about some folks who might be dangerous, but it's usually the one, it's folks that you're not expecting, right? It used to just be dogs, and we would have our meter techs bring treats and mace, and we were all set, and then the world's a little different right now.
Further questions for Andrea? Representative Parsons.
Thank you. Do you see it as, I'm guessing, one way I'm seeing it's an easy way of getting be a little bit harder for current customers, obviously, but would it be easy enough to, during the intake process of hooking somebody's power up, to just have like homeowner, or if you're the renter who is the landlord kind of thing, on the intake paperwork to get your information?
It wouldn't be necessarily required, but something we can ask, who's the landlord. We also just did a project with our team to try to get all the ones that we know are renters.
Yeah.
We've actually made some effort to be proactive and try to get all those numbers in our system.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And welcome.
Thanks.
I keep wanting to call you Commissioner.
Ex-commissioner.
That's right.
I just saw Wayne LaRoche and it's like two ex-commissioners meeting each other. Thank you for having me. Louis Porter, Washington Electric Co-op. And I've worked with met many of you over the years, one job or another, so it's good to see all you all, but it's fun to be in a new committee. I don't think I've ever testified here, so thanks for having me. And I'll just give you a very brief introduction to Washington Electric Co-op. And mostly what I want to say is that I agree with everything Andrea said. So it always makes it easy when I follow Andrea. So Washington Electric Co-op is like Vermont Electric Co-op. We're a nonprofit, member-owned electric utility. We're smaller than they are. We're about 12,000 members, 12,000 meters, about 1,300 miles of lines, and we serve the rural portions of 41 towns in Vermont. And we were, much like Vermont Electric Co-op, we were the leftovers when commercial for-profit power utilities came into Vermont, and reasonably so. They built out the profitable, densely populated parts of the state and left the remains to the co-ops. So we are very spread out. I think we're about 9 members per mile. And highly residential, 96% residential in our territory. And as Andrea said, that means that it's more expensive to provide electricity in our territories. One point that I think is worth underscoring is that as a member-owned cooperative whose business is providing electricity, we have nowhere else to go except to our members for any cost. So whenever we're talking about doing things, good things, balancing those against the rates that our member owners pay is, of importance to us because we don't have anywhere else to go. If we do something that benefits one member, other members collectively pay for it. And it's a good system. I think it's a successful system, and we've been able to successfully stay in business and provide electricity to those rural areas. But I just think we don't have investors to go to. Ultimately, it's all on our members. I personally have a long history with the co-op, except for the 11 or 12 years I lived out of state. I've been a Washington Electric member my whole life, and I grew up on a power line that stretches for almost a mile to go to one house, the house I grew up in. So I'm very aware of the costs of that to the other members of Washington Electric Co-op, and grateful to it. Not only that, but that power line goes across a beaver farm. So when I took this job, the lineman took me out and showed me the boat they have to access that power line when they have to restring it or fix it. So they have since, about 5 years ago, they moved that power line to be along the road as we try to do increased reliability. But it was a long lesson in the benefits, but also the expense of being an electric co-op member and customer. To get to your bill, I would just reiterate some of Andrea's points. We would not want to do this notification before electric service is disconnected, recognizing that puts the landlord in a bind. They would have a limited period of time to react. But like Vermont Electric Co-op, we send out many disconnection notices that never become a disconnect. And both for the volume of contacts that would mean with landlords, and also because of the privacy concerns, we wouldn't want to be sharing that information with landlords until there was actually a disconnection that happened. And you can imagine a scenario in which a landlord was considering whether to redo somebody's lease or not. And maybe if in the last year they've been notified 3 times that person was the recipient of a disconnection notice, they might be disinclined to renew that lease. We wouldn't want to be in the middle of that relationship between likely 2 members of ours, 2 owners of ours. So I would suggest if we did do such a thing, that it be after the disconnect had gone into effect. Also, as Andrea said, I think it should be clear that it's on the landlord to make sure that we have a active and good way to reach them. And I can see a scenario in which we try to reach a landlord or are unable to do so. There's damage to the property because there's a disconnect. Maybe that phone number's out of date. I would hate to have our members pay the legal bills for a dispute of that kind about who is responsible for that damage to the property. So I would say in the rulemaking process, we should endeavor to make sure that it's up to the landlord to provide up-to-date information for us to contact them. We recently actually had dispute interaction with the landlord who was upset because we'd only called one of the two phone numbers that we had active for them. So, understandable. I get why they're upset, but this is, we got to be clear about whose responsibility is to keep that notice. I actually hadn't thought of it before coming in here today, but I like the idea of a waiver. It could be nothing more than a letter signed by the tenant and the landlord. My intention, and if we were to go ahead and do this, would be to have full transparency and openness with everybody to know when the information is going to be shared and what kind of information, have both the tenant and the landlord know that. I think a waiver letter or some kind of a notification between the two, the landlord and the tenant, that maybe was filed with us would be a useful way to make sure that both parties knew that information had been requested and was gonna be provided. There will be a cost to this, but I also know that the last thing our folks who work in serving our members want to do is have a call from a landlord who says, "Hey, I've got tens of thousands of dollars damage to my property because I didn't know there was a disconnection of the power." We don't want that. Many times those landlords are also our members. We don't want that either. So I'm open to the idea. I think Andrea and I have given you some ideas of how to make it as least cumbersome and least difficult if you want to go forward and do so. Last, I just want to put a plug in for Andrea's idea of allowing remote disconnects. We do, before we do a disconnect, for the 14 to 20 days before a disconnect, we do automated calls daily. We do at least one personal call by somebody in our office. We do 2 emails. And if there's a shared infrastructure, we endeavor to notify the people who are also affected by that shared infrastructure. In addition to going out and going to the property and either leaving a notice or contacting the property, the person living at the property. Nobody is surprised when we get there to tell them that the power is going to be disconnected. There are not people for whom that in-person visit is the first time they've heard that the power is going to be disconnected.
And the in-person visit is required.
It's required now. It's required now, and to Andrea's point, frankly, it's just not safe for us to be doing that, and it's expensive. Our approach is that we try to treat all the members equally, and so when there's a cost incurred, to the extent we can, we apply that cost to the member causing that cost. And so that applies for what we call truck rolls. That applies for visits too, whether that's an emergency visit caused by an overloaded transformer or a visit to tell somebody they're being disconnected. We apply that cost to the member. So there is a cost to that member. When those costs aren't paid, as they often aren't in these cases, that cost goes to all the other members collectively. We don't think it's necessary to do those in-person visits, and we think it does put our folks in some jeopardy. So I would support Andrea's push, which I'm coming at the end of a long 7-year process for her, but let's support that push for allowing under the rule of remote disconnects.
Representative Krasner.
Great.
Do you have a guesstimate of how many folks that you actually do end up shutting off a year?
I will email you the exact number.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
if you have it too, I'd love to hear.
yeah.
I do about 50, 60 a month, maybe.
Oh,
But then
50.
but the power might come right back. You
Yeah.
can just call us that night, and so it's not necessarily long.
And in many cases, those members will apply and reconnect the power under somebody else's name also, a family member or somebody else. So there are, I'll email you the total numbers, but some of those are probably repeat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Labor.
Thank you. Louis, can you give me, out of the 12,000 meters, the number of owners versus the number of renters?
I don't have exact numbers for that. Our renter numbers are certainly lower than VEC's in terms of percentage. So I would say I would guess under 10% renters. But I should caveat that by saying we wouldn't necessarily know if the electricity was included in rent and in the name of the landlord. We wouldn't necessarily know if they were a resident or not.
But you could if there was an intake waiver.
Yep, yep.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Wes? Thank you very much for your
Thank you so much.
time.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, Maria, would you be willing to answer a couple of questions?
Just got all the experts. Nice to see you all again. Maria Royal, with Legislative Council.
Thank you. And I asked Carol Flint a question and I got the disclaimer. I'm not an attorney, but, so I thought I would ask an attorney, which is whether a landlord could require a tenant to sign a waiver of privacy.
So the short answer is I don't know. I want to look into it a little bit more. Underlying that, though, is a policy question about whether you want to put a potential tenant in that position, having to sign it. So that's just policy. But I'm guessing now, but I think if it were narrow enough, limited to account information, risk of damage to property, that there might be some circumstances in which you could say, hey, if this is about to happen, we want notice, so there might be avenues.
I would assume a voluntary waiver would cover the great majority of disconnects.
And I guess the question is, how voluntary is it if there isn't a lot of housing, and you never want to be in a position, where you don't really have an option. It's voluntary, but
right.
So I would just be cognizant of making sure the appropriate guardrails are in place. But this is off the top of my head, I would want to do a little more research thinking about.
Representative Elder.
Yeah, I would think that potentially a landlord could have it as a condition of the lease, but the other thing, maybe not. The other thing the landlord could do is just put the service in their own name. And I do think that that's a reasonable solution if this was a real concern. Add it to the rent, that was in one of the decisions. And so that is a viable option that's available to landlords, as I see it. There's no reason the tenant has to be the customer.
Any other questions? Representative Stevens.
Going back to the bill itself, though, the bill is not necessarily asking us to be this specific. It's asking us to ask PUC to be this specific.
Right.
And do we have to give them a broader than what's in the bill? Do we have to give them a broader charge to be more, again, to tell them to look at privacy issues, to tell them about, accessibility? Is that how we would have to phrase this?
Yeah, so I would answer that question. Right now, it doesn't really say much other than you will initiate rulemaking to address this particular issue, which doesn't say what you should think about or not think about. But to the extent you've had specific concerns raised and you want to ensure that the PUC takes into account privacy concerns, burden on the utilities, then you can establish that in your parameters for the rulemaking. And so that way you're at least assured that they're weighing and balancing and coming up with the appropriate procedures. So you could do that. You can start with this bill and then amend it to ensure that they address the concerns raised here.
Representative Elder.
We are saying this bill, the PUC shall do this.
Okay.
It's not like a choice. I mean, the details of how that rule would be applied would be subject. And I suppose if they came back and found some impediment to making that rule change, we might hear about it again. But the way this is, it really is a shall directive to the PUC. So it's not really like we're just kind of saying, hey, what do you think, PUC? We're saying go do this.
No, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't think you were,
No,
but I just kind of wanted to clarify
Yes,
that. Yeah.
yes.
It's fairly strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're 100% right about that.
And Maria, does the PUC typically does rulemaking? Do they also do policies and orders?
Within rules. Yeah.
Just thinking, I know that rulemaking is a long procedure.
And that probably would be appropriate if you want to make this requirement. As you heard, there's an existing PUC rule that covers disconnections, so they probably would
Amend that rule.
amend that existing rule. And as you know, it's like a mini legislative process. There's notice of the proposed rule, there's comment period, there's stakeholders are involved. So they would follow that process, which generally takes, as you know, 7 to 8 months, start to finish.
Any further questions, comments, concerns? If not, thank you, Maria, for stepping in unexpectedly. Thank you. Thanks for your time and comments. And committee, we will be back here at 9:15 tomorrow morning.
You want to keep going?
Is that a surprise?
I think it sounded like it was to Maria. Okay,